Hello, I'm Toomas Ilves, former president of Estonia, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the Digital Transformation in East Africa Conference. I'd like to thank the Aga Khan University for holding this vital conference today. And of course, I'd like to thank His Highness the Aga Khan, founder and chancellor of the university, for his vision and his inspiration. The need to digitize Estonia became clear to me in 1993 from three sources. One was from my own experience learning to code as an 11th grader in 1971. Once I learned as a 16-year-old that programming was a matter of logic and nothing mysterious, computers and digitization simply became a part of life. Hardly a deep insight, but it would offer a clue as to how to bring about digitization many years later. It would be through early education and exposure to computers and programming. Far more important was the insight that digitization of the country was ultimately a key to national development, both economic and social, as an impoverished country coming out of half a century of brutal foreign occupation. Secondly, I realized that digitization, if done right, could be the great equalizer that could overcome the inherent problems of scale, or lack of it, in a small country, even by European standards. The development aspect was simply a result of the damage done by the 50 years of military occupation of Estonia by the Soviets and Nazi Germany. Between mass repressions, harebrained economics, and the suppression of initiative and freedom, countries throughout the communist bloc stagnated, falling ever more behind as the liberal democracies of the West raced ahead, finding themselves little more than developing countries when they reemerged in 1989 to 91. The Cambridge Economic History of Modern Europe, Volume 2, contains a bar graph showing that in 1938, the last year before the onset of World War II, Estonia had a higher GDP per capita than our northern neighbor, Finland. In 1992, the first full year after the reestablishment of independence, Estonia's GDP per capita was $2,800. Our northern neighbors was $23,800 US per capita, 8 times, I repeat, 8 times higher. Not only did the problem lie in a poor economy, low wages, and all of the unbuilt, or if it was built, shoddy, substandard infrastructure that was the legacy of underdevelopment under Soviet occupation, we also faced, like all undeveloped and developing countries, a particularly acute form of Zeno's paradox, which you may recall is the mythological race between Achilles and the tortoise. Whenever Achilles would reach the tortoise, in fact, had moved ahead. This is the problem poor countries face with economic growth. A spectacular annual growth rate of, say, 10% in Estonia would increase the country's GDP per capita $280 US. An anemic, slow growth rate in Finland at this time would have yielded an increase of $476 US per capita. In other words, it's very hard to catch up. While Western and Northern Europe had in the intervening half-century continuously grown by leaps and bounds and led Eastern Europe by decades, occupied Estonia remained stagnant. The question was, how could a poor country grow quickly? By focusing on a field where there was no 50-year advantage, where there was a level playing field, and so a legacy advantage, there would be one way of getting out of this mess. For me, the answer came in 1993 with the introduction of Mosaic, the first web browser. Sir Tim Berners-Lee had invented HTTP, which you probably know from looking at any web page, standing for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And as I mentioned, he had invented it 4 years before 1993, but it was not something easy to use because you had to use the full length of the code that designated a website. When I bought from my local Radio Shack store in Washington Mosaic's 5 or 7 floppy disks and uploaded them into my computer, I discovered the World Wide Web and a new, at this time, still limited world opened up for me. Far more important was realizing that the web was where even Estonia could play on a level playing field. The internet at the time was so undeveloped at the time. So what if the US or Germany was crisscrossed by 8-lane interstate highways and or a 6-lane autobahn and with completely modern infrastructure? In 1993, and when it came to the internet, all of us stood at the same starting position. This was the moment when I began to press the Estonian government to pay serious attention to digitization. A second source of inspiration to push the government to invest in digitization came from a rather Luddite, that is, anti-technology book by Jeremy Rifkin called The End of Work, which argued that computerization would cause widespread unemployment when computers would do the work of human labor. Rifkin wrote of a Kentucky steel mill, which before automatization and digitization employed some 12,000 people. After it was automatized, according to Rifkin, the plant needed only 120 employees to produce the same amount of steel. While this may indeed have been a problem for the US, for Estonia, with its tiny population, our size had always been a source of anxiety. Yet here was a solution. Through digitization done properly, size could become far less relevant a factor. If we digitize, we could, if done right, dramatically increase our functional, if not our numerical size. Fortunately, and promoted by then Minister of Education Jaak Aaviksoo, the government adopted the Tiger Leap program, meant to bring access to computers as well as connectivity to all school districts. Begun in 1996, by 1998, all Estonian schools had computer labs and were online. Then we got to the real transformation. As the internet spread through societies and countries around the world, it became clear to Estonian IT thinkers, many of whom today continue to be leaders, that if we want to make the internet more than a place to do online shopping, that is to also provide public services, the system needed to be far more secure and manageable for the citizen. The first issue was obviously security. The standard email address plus a password login system used to this day in most commercial online transactions was understood to be unsecure already in the late 1990s and thus insufficient for any government or public service functions. Instead, we realized we would need to offer everyone in the country two-factor authentication and end-to-end encryption tied to a population registry that would ensure each person had a unique online identity. This would solve the problem of the 1991 New Yorker cartoon, which you have seen it, it's quite popular, where a dog sitting at a computer explains to another dog, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. A second security issue was database architecture. Long before the 2015 Office of Personnel Management hack in the US, that saw the records of 23 million past and present employees of the US government all stored on a single database and siphoned out by a foreign actor, and data that included the addresses and even psychological profiles of CIA employees, Estonia adopted for a distributed data exchange layer created at Tartu University, and which we call the X-Road. This allows data exchange between databases, regardless of format, platform, operating system, or language, and it does so securely and safely, as each transaction requires secure identification or authentication, and where all transactions are logged. The X-Road is currently used in some 25 countries around the world. It is an open source platform that the Estonian government gives away for free to other governments to use, and is now administered by an international nonprofit organization, the Nordic Institute for Interoperability Solutions, NIIS.org. A final aspect of the Estonian system deals with data integrity. While almost all attention in digitization has been focused exclusively on privacy, a far more important security issue is integrity. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by data integrity? Well, if someone accesses and publishes my blood type or my private correspondence or my bank account, that is a violation of privacy. It could be embarrassing, but it's not immediately dangerous. However, if someone alters my blood type record, alters my correspondence or my bank account, meaning taking away money from my bank account, it is a violation of data integrity and can have even fatal consequences. For example, if someone changes a person's blood type record. This is an aspect of digitization, unfortunately, too few governments have addressed. Since 2008, all critical national and private data, meaning healthcare records, court proceedings, and property registries, have been on a permission blockchain using keyless signature infrastructure, or KSI, which guarantees that no one can go and change data without authorization. Now, there are problems, of course, that one faces in digitization of government and public services, many of which have to do with the issues I just described, because governments don't want to do it, but nonetheless, there are still problems. The failure of the largest and richest Western societies to proceed with digitization often amazes me. This was most starkly brought home to me after leaving office in 2016, when I moved for 3 years to Stanford University in what is considered the world's capital of IT, Silicon Valley. In a 10-mile or 12-kilometer radius from my office, you could find the headquarters of companies such as Tesla, Apple, VMware, Google, Facebook, YouTube, Palantir, and countless other billion-dollar companies. Yet, when I tried to register my daughter to go to school, I found myself back in the paper world of the 1950s. I needed to take my electricity bill, her passport, my wife's passport, something called a DS 2019 form that certified that I was a teacher at Stanford, and my daughter's paper vaccination certificates. After driving to the Board of Education headquarters, taking a number, and waiting for 20 minutes, I was finally called to register my daughter. The woman behind the desk took all the papers, went to another room, photocopied them for some 15 minutes, came back, returned all the documents, and then proceeded to fill out some form by hand, taking the relevant information from the photocopied documents. This, in the citadel, the capital of the digital world, it was unbelievable. In Estonia, this would have taken 30 seconds and from my home. Well, why? Well, the first answer is that, like Germany, Japan, and the UK, the US seems paralyzed by an irrational fear of a digital identity. People have driver's licenses, social security cards, and any number of other identity documents, but for some reason, the government does not offer secure digital identities, even 25 years after Estonia pioneered the effort. Even the United States Department of Defense introduced two-factor authentication for its employees 12 years after Estonia offered it to all of its citizens. Which gets to the first issue governments face in digitization: political will. It is easier, politically less risky, to continue to live in the world of paper, slow, inconvenient, rather than in the digital world. After all, if you have never experienced the alternative, why change? As long as governments fear to offer citizens a secure digital identity, they will remain stuck in the previous centuries where only paper mattered. And this in a world where countries are becoming more and more digitized at a fast rate, leaving those developed countries far behind. When a country does decide to digitize its government and public services, the second issue is that leaders too often think it is merely a matter of buying stuff, buying computers, servers, data banks, and so on. Just let some engineers hook it all up and we'll be digital. No, that is simply the hardware of the digital world. If you want to digitize how the government serves its citizens, you need to think of the software, both literal and figurative. Laws are the software of society. So is the culture. How do you match up your digitization efforts with your legal system or with the cultural assumptions of your population? What information should be private? For example, medical records. What can be semi-private? Tax records in my country, for example, or public property records in Estonia, something which, on the other hand, is unthinkable in more southern countries in Europe. Digitization is not a one-size-fits-all process. A consulting firm may tell you that you need this kind of computer and software, but digitization is never a turnkey project where all the work is done for you, like, say, building a bridge or a tunnel. It requires the active participation of all of the key stakeholders of society: political leaders, lawmakers, public servants, and non-governmental organizations, to ensure the effort is appropriate for the culture and legal system of a country. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Finally, in order to effectively digitize a country, leaders need to realize how revolutionary it can be, completely reordering how governance works, as well as how to think about governance. For as long as humans have lived in states, bureaucracies have been needed to run them. Yet since bureaucracies, or just governance, were invented some 5,000 years ago, they have always operated as a serial or sequential process. A paper or a papyrus or a parchment is filled out, you hand it in, it gets looked at, it's registered, it's stamped, it's approved or not approved, and then it will proceed to the next office. With digitization of governance and government services, for the first time, the process of running a country can be made a parallel process where steps necessary to run the country occur simultaneously. Just to give you an example, when a child is born in a paper-based society, it is typically up to the newborn's parent to run a gauntlet of registering the birth, getting a birth certificate, obtaining health insurance, etc. In parallel processing, this can be done in one single step, since all these processes occur simultaneously. Or take another odious example. There is no need to get one's employer to mail you a copy of your annual wages or calculate your deductions based on the number of children you have. All of this is done far more efficiently by a machine through digitization, leaving the citizen to pursue more productive activities, while the government itself works more efficiently, saving the taxpayer money. While there are countless other lessons of digitization which have been explored extensively in lots of books, what I've talked about are the essentials, the basics that are necessary to understand the fundamentals of digitization. Equally importantly, I would argue, especially for this audience, the countries that do digitize their government, their services, will be the countries that will be the winners of the 21st century. Thank you for your attention and good luck.